We need more women. Oh, I better shut up. Okay. Critical part of this thing is to realize just how big the energy business is. And so here's a summary in one slide. Right now, in this year, probably will end up, once we're finished doing the year, and we look back, and we see how much energy was consumed around the world to run the world. And it's certainly going to be 200 million barrels of oil equivalent, more likely somewhere 205 to 210 million barrels of oil per day runs the world. Not just oil, there's about 80 million barrels of oil, about 50 to 60 equivalent natural gas, a whole bunch of coal. Those three, about, 85% of all of our energy comes from that. You can almost forget about everything else. Oil, gas, and coal, that's it. It used to be just coal. And then there was oil. Changed the world. Cars and planes, transportation, independence. Go out tonight, look around, find something that's big that isn't driven by oil, or you can't find too many things. And then coal is our dominant electrical energy source. Fossil fuels, that's what runs the world. There is quite a bit of nuclear power, about 400 functioning nuclear reactors around the world. Actually, they've been having a great success story. We haven't, to my knowledge, killed anybody with these things. They're running very efficiently. In fact, now, since they're all old by and large, they're all been paid for. They're actually very, very cheap, very efficient generators of energy. It's actually a wonderful story. But in the overall scheme of things, it doesn't really matter very much. Biomass, there's a lot of it. Most of this is those people going out and getting sticks and stones on it, sticks and cow dung and burning it. There's trees and so forth. Overall, around the world, adds up to a lot. There's 6.5 billion people on the planet. Hydroelectric used to be a very dominant source. It's now a little thing. This could maybe be twice as big, but then we've taken care of pretty much all the hydro energy to be had on the planet. And this little bitty thing over here that you can hardly see is all currently of solar, wind, and geothermal. In fact, if I took geothermal away from this, which is mostly places like the geysers in California, Hawaii has a lot of it. If you take that away, you would not see anything from where you're sitting at all. So when you talk about solar and wind, down where I come from, Houston, Texas, you can talk to people around that know something about energy. They just kind of look at you with this wry smile. You've just shown them that you don't know anything about energy. Energy is about oil, coal and gas. These are the big mamas. This is what really runs the world. Unless you're going to play the game at this level, you're not talking about energy, you're talking about something else. Well, by the middle of the century, this century we're in, we're going to need more energy. Even if the top billion people on the planet didn't need any more energy. And all of our future energy demands we take care of by efficiency, we're just smarter. There's the other 5.5 billion, soon to be 7, 8 billion people who are definitely going to develop. They're going to need energy. So there's all sorts of projections for what the energy needs will be by the middle of the century. By and large, the bulk of people who think about this agree it's going to be at least twice of what we've got. So 210 million barrels of oil per day, 450 by middle of the century, each and every day. 450 million barrels of oil or the equivalent from some source has to come. Just the economics, the incredible challenge of that is hard to really grasp. I mean, every month or so I have sort of another getting up morning when I realize, oh, that's really a big challenge. And this is what the energy business is trying to sort out. How are they ever going to do that? Well before 2050 to get anything sustained. So you look at where is the power available to produce, the energy source, primary energy source that's available to do things at that magnitude. It turns out it's very simplifying. I have a list here in a minute where we'll go down everything. We're looking for terawatts. And the big place where we can get the terawatts we need, interestingly, is in the place where there's might as well be nothing right now. So you go from an energy system, the biggest enterprise of humanity, it looks like this, to the biggest enterprise being revolutionized to look like that within the lifetimes of your children, who knows, maybe many of the people on this planet. And the technology that enables that has to happen a lot sooner than 2050 because of the huge size of the operation. So This is what I call the terawatt challenge, to find a way of changing the energy source so we can still be prosperous, not just the top billion of us, but 5 to 10 billion people on the planet with enough clean energy to sustain not only a current lifestyle, but what we hope we'll get to. You're just not going to get it from these guys. You need it from someplace else. That's the challenge. So there is a magnificent book written by Daniel Yergin called The Prize. Got the Pulitzer Prize for that, awarded in this room in 1992. Magnificent book. I suggest if you haven't read it, go out and get it. It's pretty much in all the bookstores. If you've read it, go back and read it again, please. It's the story of oil for the past 150 years. It's also, coincidentally, and not by accident, the story pretty much of world history for the past 150 years. Why? Because oil drove the whole thing. And if you go look into oil, really is what made things work. Particularly now when we're looking for a way of storing hydrogen in our cars, in the gas tank. So it'll be anything near reminiscent of our experience of driving into a Shell station now and filling up with gas and oil. Gasoline, we get it in 3 minutes or 4 minutes. We have another 300 or 400 miles and we drive off with a cup of coffee, and it didn't cost that much. We're looking for how we could store hydrogen in the back of the car to be something. And now we begin to realize with what great poetry Mother Nature made gasoline. Because it's got the hydrogens, 2 hydrogens attached to every carbon, a couple carbons attached to each other, so it's not a gas that evaporates away, but it's a liquid and flows and fills the tank. And it's volatile enough that when we put it in the engine, it'll vaporize. And we don't take the hydrogens back off the carbon and burn the hydrogens and throw the carbons away. We just burn the whole thing. And we got water, but we get CO2. How bad could that be? It's pure, nothing wrong with CO2. We exhale it all the time. The energy content of a gallon of gasoline is vastly greater per unit weight than most other ways of storing hydrogen, particularly per unit volume. That's what makes the world work, and cars and trucks and planes. And when we take energy from the giant oil fields in Saudi Arabia, wherever, all the way around the planet, we put it in a tanker and we ship it all the way across the world, and the end-up cost of that per gallon of gas is just a little thing. Energy, it's not only an energy source, primary energy source, it's energy storage, it's energy transport. That's what makes the world work. You try to do that with hydrogen, and the volume of hydrogen that has the same content of energy is like 3 times bigger, even if you're liquid hydrogen. We may never get an answer for our cars that is beautiful as gasoline. I know you hate it, but it's best. When you find you can't store hydrogen like you do gasoline, you're going to moan and groan and scream and cry and get drunk and so forth, but the next day you got to get up and get used to it. So gasoline and oil is what drove this last century. If oil continues to be the basis of economic prosperity, particularly energy prosperity in this century like it was in the last one, this will not be a prosperous century. It will be a pretty unpleasant century because 2 reasons. We will certainly peak in worldwide oil production sometime this century, maybe within this decade. Maybe it's peaked already. It's not that we're going to be done with oil. We'll be taking oil out of the ground probably by the end of the century. But the next year there will be less oil to fill an increasing market. That's one reason. Second is, basically right now, only 1 billion people really use energy to distribute. The rest of the population on the planet is going to start using more and more energy, and energy is a fungible quantity. There's a worldwide market in it. If oil remains the basis of prosperity for our human culture on this planet deep into this century, it's not going to be a prosperous century. Prosperity is probably the single biggest driver of this whole issue. We need a new oil. Many of you have probably seen charts like this. This is a forward view of fossil energy as presented by John Bookhout, who was president of Shell back in the mid-'80s. I put it up here because it's, John Bookhout's no longer the president of Shell. Shell doesn't have to say, yes, we believe this is right. But in my going around this last year and talking to people, this is not a bad guess. So the last century looked like this. In fossil energy, we had a little dip here with the Arab oil embargo, and we got much more efficient, but we hit it back on up. We have internally in our institutions, in our mind, we live in a world where fossil energy has been nothing but gone up and up and up. By 2050, the peak will have happened a long time ago. It'll be back sometime here. Some people argue, and I've talked to many of them, it might be right now. Saudi Arabia, in particular, may be very close to peaking. There's a whole story there. But it's going to be a broad thing, maybe. Although new technologies suck oil out of the ground much faster than old ones, it may not come down smoothly on the other side unless you develop these other ones. And then there's the question of, well, how fast can you develop when you realize what it used to be like to have 100,000 barrels of oil coming out even from a small well in Saudi Arabia just every day cheaply. And you try to do the same thing with tar sands or oil shales. But we'll peak and we'll go down, and it's not going to be dramatically higher level than here. Maybe it'll be up here if we're really lucky. And then there's oil. And then there's a big issue now with natural gas. We used to think in North America we'd have plenty of natural gas. Let's all switch to it and generate electricity. Now we realize, no, that's not true. And we're going to be importing natural gas from, guess where? Russia, Middle East, in liquefied tankers for as long as we can see in the future. Maybe we get incredibly lucky with deep offshore in the Gulf, but we would have to get incredibly lucky to really change the story. There appears to be plenty of coal, but if we really had to run coal as the dominant energy source for the whole planet, it ain't clear that there's actually economically recoverable coal. And the demand scenario here put up in 1985 by John Bookhout is already wrong. Our demand is much higher. There was never the notion that China was going to develop here. And of course, China's developing like mad. And India and sub-Saharan Africa will. So this is the century we're in. What are we going to do about it if we're still living in a world where we assume that energy prosperity is going to come from oil or natural gas? It's just not a plausible scenario. Then there's this other little issue that if you plot CO2 levels in the atmosphere as a function of time for the last 1,000 years, and you plot mean surface temperature for the past 1,000 years, you notice a correlation here. This is a pretty compelling plot. When I look at this, I try to remind myself, now what was the argument that said we didn't have to worry about CO2? Tell me again what that argument is. Are you saying that the worldwide temperature, this little excursion we're taking up in temperature, is just an artifact by some other driver, and I suppose in a while it'll turn around and go back down, but that red line just keeps on going up? Tell me that argument again. I don't know that there is a good argument. Okay, so that's the problem. So what's the answer? When you're looking for terawatts, there aren't that many answers. And very interestingly, in this discussion, as I've gotten into it and talked to all sorts of people, almost everybody and their brother has some favorite energy notion. There are all sorts of ways of generating energy. But if you put to these ways of generating energy the terawatt challenge, it's amazing how many are no longer on the table. They're okay for 1/10 of a terawatt or maybe a terawatt, but they can't go beyond that. Big contingent, a lot involved with the left hand of this conversation, believe strongly in conservation efficiency. I think I do too, particularly within the developed world. Amory Lovins is one of the most effective, articulate spokesmen of these people. I suggest you look at the Rocky Mountain Institute website and you'll really get a wonderful presentation of this. Obviously there are others. And I can imagine that in our future, in the developed world, the top 1 billion people, we could get along with the same amount of energy we're using, even though we keep advancing, just by getting smarter and using it. But I don't understand, and I don't believe the argument that 5.5 billion other people on the planet, let alone the new ones that are going to come along, are going to be able to handle energy efficiency as being the answer. Maybe I'm wrong. In which case, if you flip on this switch and you go for this new energy program, we find the new oil and we just got cheap energy abundantly. So sue us. We got too much energy. How bad would that be? But if we don't do it, and you can't do it through energy efficiency, I mean, what is the world going to be like? Hydroelectric, everybody agrees it's just not enough to handle the problem that we have in front of us. It's really a great resource when you've got it, if you don't mind flooding the land and the other environmental impacts of it. And these things aren't renewable energy forever. The water does build up behind the dam and silts up. And there is a risk, a real health, a real disaster risk if the dam breaks. the flooding that comes from it,